Hello once again and welcome to this week's Realty Talk show. Well, just this week we were told that Brisbane now has the second highest median house price in Australia. Living in Brisbane, I can attest to the fact that the pain is real. And while we don't rent, we're fortunate enough to own our principal place. I can see the level of homelessness and can only imagine the struggle and the pressure that tenants must feel every day. We're going to devote time in this week's show to continue to search for a solution. And Bushy has two outstanding guests to help us do just that this week. Firstly, we're going to turn the spotlight on the most expensive state to rent or buy in Australia. That's New South Wales. As we talk to Jo Natoli. Jo is the founder of the Rental Specialists in Sydney. We've spoken to Jo on previous shows. She's also a 30-year veteran and current Real Estate Institute of New South Wales board member. And then Bushy's next guest takes a look at the raft of rental reforms in South Australia as we speak to award-winning senior property manager Mariah Brierley from LJ Hooker in Adelaide's eastern suburbs. But just before we start, I want to thank our supporters and our content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, Get Rare Property and Apiro Marketing. Now, if this is your first time with us, a big welcome to you. I hope you enjoy the show. You're going to find us on all podcast players and also through the Southern Cross Oz Stereo Network. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button and help us to continue to bring you the best guests every week. And don't forget too, you can join the conversation anytime on Facebook by simply searching and finding the Property Hub Collective. We'll be back in just a moment to start this week's show.
Property deductions can save you thousands of dollars each year. To make sure you maximise deductions, you need to work with the most experienced quantity surveyor in the country. BMT Tax Depreciation is the leading specialist in the industry. They've completed over 700,000 tax deduction schedules for residential investment and commercial properties Australia-wide. BMT guarantee to find double your fee in the first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote. Realty Talk and your host, Bushy Martin.
Now, it seems that the housing and rental crisis across the country is in the midst of a bit of a perfect storm, with migration at record levels adding to rental pressures, the increasing severity and frequency of extreme weather events forcing many out of their homes, new property construction is at record lows, and housing costs and flow-on rents are at record levels. All this at a time when governments around the country are introducing ever more restrictive ways of residential tenancy reforms that have growing potential to further pull investors and rental stock out of the market. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in New South Wales. So in our continued property management feature series, we want to get to the bottom of what's really happening on the ground in the Premier State, given the deluge of harebrained headlines and reactive half-baked solutions that are being suggested about the topic, with a specific focus on the details of rental reforms and the flow-on effects this may be having on property and rental conditions. And there's no one better credentialed and positioned with their sleeves rolled up in the trenches to discuss this than our guest and specialist property investment manager, Jo Natoli. And I did pronounce that wrong, Jo.
How are you?
I knew I would do that. Now, I know that you're also a 30-year veteran and actually founder of the Rental Specialists in Sydney, and also the current Real Estate Institute of New South Wales board member. So welcome to the Property Hub's Realty Talk show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah, looking forward to this discussion. And I guess to set the scene, Jo, can you sort of start with a bit of a quick summary of the rent reforms that have been made today?
So rental reforms were brought in around March 2020. There were some very broad reforms that came in that addressed things like minimum housing standards, allowing the tenants the freedom to make some very minor changes to the properties. We legislated break lease fees in that particular tranche of legislative reforms. And there were a host of other things as well, such as changes to the rent increase regime. regime, where it went from whenever we wanted to once every 12 months. There were reforms around water usage and efficiency measures and how and when we can claim back water usage charges from our tenants. And there was also a host of domestic violence legislation that came in as well. And in addition to that, in 2022, in December, we had strengthened rent bidding legislation that came in.
Right. So there's been quite a number of successive waves of this that are coming through. What impacts are they having on landlords, tenants, property managers, as well as the flow-on effects to rental supply and the rental crisis that everyone's talking about?
In 2020, when the first tranche of changes came in, it was panic stations. Whilst we did have a long time to get our head around the new legislation, and we had quite a long education process from fair trading with the industry. We also had COVID hit that same time. And so it was a very, very, very stressful period for particularly residential property managers. Looking back March, April 2020, it was hard.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of landlords would have been up in arms and probably because they weren't aware of the nitty-gritties of the legislation, were probably potentially overacting, would make it very tough on you. Do you think all of this exercise and this ongoing progression has had an impact on rental supply and contributed to the rental crisis? What's your thoughts, Jo?
In the investor world, investors are getting increasingly frustrated with how their rights are being slowly eroded. There is a mentality out there, and rightly so, in my opinion, that it's my property. I should be able to transact with it as I will, as I want. Yes, tenants have rights, but you're taking everything away from me. And it really is. A lot of landlords are feeling very, very frustrated right now.
Yes, I could well imagine. So are there any ongoing reforms that are being proposed? And if so, what are your thoughts on them and what impacts are they likely to have as you see it?
There are a number of reforms being discussed at the moment and being considered. The first one is around a portable bond scheme. There is conversation in the marketplace about how much money tenants have out there in the bond world and how difficult it can be for some tenants to save the money for a second bond whilst they're transitioning from one place to another. Yep. That is proving a little bit difficult to bed down in the mechanics, but nevertheless, that is a priority for the New South Wales government. The other reforms that are being discussed at the moment is the government wants to allow pets in rental properties as a given. And I believe the model will be based on the Victorian model where a pet is allowed. The owner has a certain period of time to object to that particular pet. If they're silent on that, then it's an automatic approval of the pet. So we're moving in that direction. Chris Minns, the Premier, has said that that's happening. We as an industry are yet to see the detail on that. There's two other major things. The one is they want to change no grounds evictions. Now, as an industry, we are unsure whether they want to remove no grounds evictions on both a fixed term tenancy, which is called an end of fixed term eviction, as well as the periodic. So we're a little bit concerned about how that's going to play out. I think that, in my personal opinion, I can live with a no grounds eviction on a periodic, but if they take away the no grounds on a fixed term, I think that will be disastrous for landlords, and I'm not terribly happy with that. If that happens, and it has a lot of property managers and a lot of landlords concerned, that particular piece of legislation that they're looking at tampering with.
I can imagine. Can you expand on why you think landlords and yourselves are feeling that way? It's probably pretty self-evident, but I'd love you to spell it out if you can.
If we don't have the ability to terminate a tenancy at the end of the fixed term, then we end up with a situation where we could potentially have life tenancies.
Yep.
And we don't want that. It's our investment property. I am an investor myself, so I understand it completely. We want to be able to deal with our property in a commercial manner as and when we see fit. It's nothing more and nothing less than that. We want the ability to deal with our property. That's it.
Yeah.
Where a tenancy falls over into a periodic tenancy, there are already reasons that we need to give to a tenant for that termination to proceed. So there's not going to be too much change around that, except for the removal of the 90-day no grounds notice. Ideally for us, for property managers, for landlords, we'd like to see that maintained as well. However, if we have to choose between one or the other, I would opt to let that go, but retain the end of fixed term tenancy ability. So it has a lot of people nervous right now.
Yeah, I can imagine. I could see that one having a real impact right across the industry, because people just pull their properties out of the market, and investors would be present to get into it because of the handcuffs that puts on them in terms of the flexibility to do what they want when they need with their property, as far as that goes. The pet issue, again, I'd love your thoughts on that, because I know back in the days when my good wife owned and ran a property management business, she used to encourage landlords to accept tenants that had pets, because they were cutting themselves out of a big portion of the potential rental market. However, there were some pretty clear parameters around that in terms of the type of animal, the behaviour of the animal, making good to any damage that was done to the property. So that was all sorted out front. But I'm not sure how it looks in the context of the legislation that's being proposed in New South Wales. But can you put a bit more colour around that one and your thoughts on that as well, please, Jo?
I'm interested to see the detail around what the government is thinking on that. We haven't received as an industry any detail on that yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Common sense has to prevail here. The property needs to suit the animal needs to suit the property. The problem lies in that if we give an approval, or if the owner gives an approval for an animal and it's a strictly outdoor animal, how do we, other than special conditions in the lease, how do we prevent that animal from entering the property, from causing damage? I do agree that by allowing pets, we're opening the tenant pool so much wider, and we are also tenants with pets tend to be more sticky. They tend to really lay down roots. They like to stay in the property because they know how hard it is to find a property that does allow pets. So they tend to be great tenants overall. But yeah, we need to make sure that there's common sense in that legislation. Owners are going to need to ensure that they have very, very good insurance policies in place, and property managers also are going to need to ensure that they are really precise and particular with their entry condition reports. None of this, no comments, no photos thing. It will force property managers to be much more precise, much more detailed with their entry condition reports, which that isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. It draws a very well-defined line in the sand in terms of the condition of the property before and post the pen. And as you say, let's just hope that the legislation incorporates a common sense discretionary element that's matching the property to the pet and the pet to the property, because having a Great Dane in a one-bedroom multi-story apartment wouldn't make a lot of sense. And if the legislation allows that carte blanche, and then you've got to object to it with a potential that they'll get knocked back, then that doesn't make any sense for anyone, really.
That's exactly right. And also, of course, then we're leaving it in the hands of the members at the tribunal who, well, I don't need to say too much about that.
No, we might reserve that conversation for another time, Jo. But now, I guess to bring it all to a head and really get your thoughts on the future, from your property management perspective, what needs to change to actually improve rental conditions moving forward, given the crisis that everyone keeps talking about?
I think what needs to happen is landlords need to feel like they are being supported. The rental market is such at the moment where landlords need tenants and tenants need landlords, and it's probably, they need each other, and so there needs to be respect on both sides. We can't have this punch up between both sides, which is what's been happening at the moment. Landlords feel like they have just been beaten to death. I have to be frank about that. They feel like they're beaten to death, and I do speak to some of my clients and they think to themselves, why am I even bothering? So let's stop punishing owners. Let's stop punishing investors and support them, because without investors, there wouldn't be enough public housing to house everybody who needs accommodation. We're already experiencing a housing and affordability crisis. So, if more landlords leave the market, then that's going to be disastrous. But if the powers that be continue to fiddle around with the legislation and make investing prohibitive in New South Wales, then that's exactly what's going to happen, and we're going to be in all sorts of trouble.
Well, pretty good food for thought in the context of the conditions that we're now in. And if there's ongoing tranches of these rental reforms that are ever tightening and restricting the ability of landlords, on top of land tax impositions and restrictions on Airbnb durations and everything else that's been layered on the front, for rental freezes that keep getting popped up by the Greens at the odd time, which just I won't even comment on that either, because it just beggars imagination.
I know.
Pretty scary concept, Jo, but again, I want to thank you for coming onto the show today to share your very informative, insightful exploration of all these issues. And we encourage anyone in Sydney who'd like to investigate this further to reach out to you at the rentalspecialist.com.au by clicking the link in the show notes. And thank you again for sharing all this with us here on the show today, Jo.
Thank you for having me.
Successful property investment is a game of finance. Do you have the right team and the right game plan? Realty Talk is brought to you by Know How Property. More than mortgage brokers, Bushy Martin and his team of investment architects set you up with a sustainable strategy structured to lower your costs, tax, risk and stress while increasing your capacity for growth. Know How has helped over 1,900 homeowners and investors secure more than $800 million in property wealth. So get set to live more, work less, and live your legacy. Want to know how to invest in your freedom? Visit knowhowproperty.com.au. This is Realty Talk, powered by realty.com.au.
Now, as we continue our extended feature focus on property management, if you're adopting our suggested borderless natural approach to your property portfolio so that you can diversify and identify the relative property strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats around the country so that you can optimise your property performance, this week we take a deep dive look at what's happening and what's about to happen with a raft of rental reforms in the festival and wine state of good old South Australia, where progressive waves of changes are being implemented to the rights and obligations of tenants, landlords, agents and property managers. So to find out what this means to you, we're joined by industry veteran and award-winning senior property manager, Mariah Brierley from LJ Hooker Kensington Unley in Adelaide's leafy eastern suburbs. So welcome to Realty Talk, Maria. There I go. I just called you Maria, and
it always happens.
Yeah, we should have talked about that off air because Mariah definitely is, and made the Freudian slip. So now, moving beyond that, just to sort of set the scene, Mariah, can you start by giving us a summary of the recent rental reform changes and stages in SA?
Yeah, certainly. So last year started the first wave of changes, which saw things come in like the changes to bonds, with them decreasing for tenants to make bonds and payment of bonds a little bit more achievable and affordable for them. So we saw the 4-week bond extend up to the $800 a week, and then a 6-week bond over that. So previously we were sitting at $250 for 4 weeks, and then anything over at 6 weeks. Along with that, they brought in the ban of rental bidding. So that's to stop agents or landlords trying to increase that price behind the application process and behind what's advertised online. They were the two main changes that came from that wave. Thankfully, things like rental bidding wasn't a huge shock to I guess, the professional industry. It was something considered a little bit immoral beforehand. So those changes have helped. But even just the pricing of rentals, so removing that ability to have a range online and having one price so that it's very clear for everyone going forward what a property should be advertised at.
Okay, that's good. And there was another raft of changes came in on the 1st of March this year. Talk us through those.
They did. So not as many changes, I guess, on that side from the 1st of March. I guess the most notable was the change to the frequency of rental increase could be done, so limiting that to once a year, so once every 12 months, allowing that. And also the change around subletting. So previously this could come at a charge to tenants and could be denied. So just changing that so that tenants aren't charged for that right to sublet, and not allowing landlords to decline that request without a reasonable explanation for that.
Yeah, okay. I know that there's a whole bunch of new and tougher penalties imposed, and the penalties sort of jumped up 10 to 20 times.
Yeah. And I think that's quite good for the industry, to mandate that and show that it is required that everyone follow that same line in legislation.
Yeah, okay. Now, given your long-term role in the industry then, what impacts are you seeing these changes having on landlords, potential property investors and property managers like yourself?
Yeah, I guess the most recent changes haven't changed too much in the way we operate. It's, I guess, the bonds have raised a little bit of concern around landlords, the insurance, should there be a bond claim. So the requirement on an agent or a landlord to make sure that those routine inspections are conducted regularly and correctly to make sure that there's a limitation to any damages to a property. But also, tougher on, I guess, following up rents and those sorts of things, because there's a little bit less of a safety net there. But also making sure things are in place for landlords, like their insurance policies and compliance, to make sure that they are protected should something happen and those bonds be on the lighter side, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know the Adelaide market's been going gangbusters in the last couple of years, and everyone from everywhere is piling into the equation. But have you seen potential property investors, those that aren't in there yet but are thinking about it, has it scared the horses much in terms of those changes that come in as you read it?
I don't think the current changes have. I think the upcoming changes that have been proposed and are going through Parliament at the moment are certainly starting to scare off potential investors or those that are in the market that are caught between selling and maybe going back into the rental market, are starting to weigh that up a little bit more seriously now.
Well, that's a great entree into exactly that subject, Mariah. So talk us through what those upcoming rental changes are and when you think they may be implemented.
Yeah, so we don't have a date for those changes yet. Hopefully, I would suspect they're going to come in at the beginning of the financial year. I guess it just depends how quick they push them through Parliament. I guess the most notable of those changes will be allowing tenants to have pets in properties without landlords being able to decline that without a reasonable reason again. But also things like we're extending the notice that a tenant must be given should they wish to vacate. I think they are doubling that now to around the 60-day mark.
Okay.
And also in terms of renewing rent or lease agreements, that they are going to make sure that they are renewed unless there's a prescribed reason for cancelling those lease renewals as well. So following very much along the likes of what Victorian government has brought in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think Queensland has sort of been rippling out in that neck of the woods as well in terms of similar exercises as far as that goes. And I guess, again, I'd love your thoughts on this, but allowing pets, I know that when my good wife was running property management business, she was actually encouraging landlords to accept pets because you were knocking out a big chunk of the tenant population if you said no to that. And certainly there's ways of managing that to make sure it's not going to damage the property. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's right. I think in the last maybe 4 to 5 years, especially around that COVID time, we saw a shift in landlords' open-mindedness to have pets at the properties, knowing that obviously people were spending a lot more time at home and they wanted that companionship. And as long as it's managed correctly, again, we don't see too many problems with those pets coming through. And that's been joined along by landlord insurance policies starting to cover damage from pets. So you're seeing that across the board, people are starting to understand that pets are a matter of, or a fact of life and how we operate. So I think it's just a matter of putting that in the legislation to make it even for everybody.
Yeah, no, well said. Now, I know that a subject I'm pretty sure it's probably been talked about in SA, but it certainly has been implemented in Queensland, is the need to meet minimum housing standards. Is that something that's on the table in SA, and what does that mean and what impact do you think that'll have?
I believe it's on the table. It's not something that they've confirmed will go ahead. I think it's definitely a great thing for the industry because there are probably quite a few subpars around with people that aren't in the position to maintain them or perhaps don't know what they need to do. So I think it is a really good thing for the industry, but I think it will see a lot of investors potentially exit the market if they can't afford to bring those properties up to standard within the time frame set, which is why I think we're seeing in a lot of the eastern states as well at the moment.
Yeah, there's been quite an exit out of a lot of properties because people just can't afford to spend the money to bring them up to speed. I guess in association with that, I'll be interested in your thoughts on, a growing interest in other states is also the energy efficiency and water saving standards that are being implemented and an energy rating that is going to start attaching almost to the value of properties as well. Is that something that's been thrown around in good old Adelaide?
It's something that's being spoken about more on an industry level than I believe a government level at the moment. But I think it's sort of once this next wave of legislation is implemented, it wouldn't be far away from the next wave, I think, for them to bring on if they're sort of looking at doing it in 6 to 12-month increments. But I think obviously that's something they're going to have to allow landlords a fair bit of time to get up to standard and get under wraps because it's something that, especially in the eastern suburbs, they are a lot of older homes, so it can take some time to get that work done.
Yeah, no, good point. I know, again, in the eastern states, granny flats are a dime a dozen, and that's all been incorporated in residential tenancy agreements. Is that something that's not such a big issue in South Australia, but is that something that's part of the discussion?
It is. I believe that's coming in the next wave that we're seeing is that they will make the tendency of that be something that's optional, which we haven't had before, which I guess brings on a whole new set of challenges in the way of how we set those up for their energy and their water and those sorts of things as well.
Yeah.
But it's something that I don't see as all too common in Adelaide at the moment.
Yeah, no, good call. So I guess bringing that all together, and we've touched on a bit of this already, but what influence do you think these future potential reforms are likely to have on future investor appetites for SA when we compare it with what might be happening elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it will certainly make landlords and investors a little bit more hesitant in Adelaide, especially where we're seeing, say, places like the city where there's a lot of building still happening. Those rents aren't increasing as much as what we would have liked or what we would have predicted. But in saying that, the entrance point to the market in Adelaide for an investor is a lot more affordable than it is in other states. So it does present a good trade-off in that situation.
Yeah, no, very good point. Given all of that then, Mariah, how can property investors and landlords best ensure that they're actually going to be complying with the changes while still optimising their investment performance?
Yeah, I guess from a landlord perspective or an agency perspective, for us, it's adopting and being very proactive to those changes. So making sure that you're keeping up to date with what is coming out from the government, whether that be through CBS or REITs or your property manager, and making sure that as these changes come to light, there's an action plan for those going ahead. And even if you're in the position prior to the tax year ending, being able to do some of those works ready to claim on tax and getting a depreciation set to make sure you're optimising everything that you can is probably the best way to go at the moment.
Yeah, no, very well said. Well, it's certainly, I love times of change because it always creates opportunity for those who are smart enough to recognise it. And what you've reinforced today is that I would hate to be a DIY private landlord trying to manage a property myself, because they're just
Absolutely.
not going to know what they don't know, and they're probably getting themselves into all sorts of hot water without even realising it at this point in time. So I just want to thank you for keeping us abreast of the ongoing changes to the rental laws and their impacts in South Australia, Mariah. And we'll get you back again to talk more about continued rental reforms as they take shape. So thanks again for joining us on the Realty Talk Show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Are you curious about harnessing your super for property investment? Propel your future with the enlightening online seminar, The Ultimate Masterclass to Self-Managed Super Fund Property Mastery. Reserve your spot now at getrare.com.au/SMSF. Spearheaded by Rusty from independent buyers agency Get Rare Properties, this masterclass unravels strategic property investment using your self-managed superannuation fund. You know, it's not just about learning. It's about transforming your financial future through education. So embrace this opportunity to enrich your investing acumen. Enroll now in the free masterclass and begin a journey that marries insight with action, leading to a financially empowered tomorrow.
Unlock bonus content now as a premium subscriber.
And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Make sure you don't miss a single episode of Realty Talk or Bushy's Get Invested podcast. Both are delivered to you each week, and you can do that by subscribing to the Property Hub now on your favourite podcast player or wherever you are listening to or watching this show. Also, an invitation for you to join the conversation anytime. We'd love you to comment on Facebook. Simply search for the Property Hub Collective. A special thanks to our supporters and content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, Get Rare Property, and Apiro Marketing. I'm Kevin Turner, and on behalf of Bushy and the Property Hub team, we look forward to seeing you again next week.